So this morning, my name is Moses, and I will be talking about the Web Developer's Tool Bag. Now, these days, there's a lot of tools that have come out, and as craftsmen, we tend to look for things that help us as developers work better, more efficiently, brag to our friends that we're using the best and the greatest. So it can be a bit overwhelming when there's something else that's popped up and you don't know how to use it, or you actually want to, but you don't know where it fits in within your process and your project workflow. So the first thing that I'm going to tell you is that it's not about the tools, and it really is, but we actually do put a whole lot of emphasis on the tools we use for development. So to start it off, I'll take you back to about 100 years ago, 1913. And this time, Industrial Revolution had already come in, and we had the automobile had already been invented. You could buy a car. It was extremely expensive, and they did a shoddy job in doing it. So only the rich could afford the vehicles, and when they did, the cars were, in comparison with the progress in which the automobile manufacturing has come through, were actually quite shoddy. So this guy shows up, and he'd been building engines, he'd been making cars, started his first company, it failed, owed a whole lot of money to the folks that who had financed him on his first try, and a whole lot of people credit him for inventing the automobile. But that is not what he actually did. What he did was the introduction of the moving assembly line. Now, the assembly line had been a concept that was already used in manufacturing of goods, and what made it such an amazing fit was the fact that it moved the manufacturing of a car from about 12 hours down to 2 hours and 30 minutes. So from when there were, the parts, the individual pieces, all built out together to when it actually drove off, 2 hours and 30 minutes. So Henry Ford, to my thing, was a perfectionist in terms of creating a process that was efficient, one that was repeatable, one that could be continued grown to where it became the main ingredient to the success of the Model T. So what am I trying to say here? It's not about the tools. So what is it about? It's about your workflow. It's about your process. It's about how you do things. You may be really skilled. You may have maybe smart. But if you don't have a process that works for you, you will not be successful. So apart from learning the skills, apart from learning the different tools, you need an efficient workflow. So what are the characteristics of a good workflow? Number one, it has to be predictable. So you should be able to tell, once you take a step, the very first thing you do, kind of what the next step obviously is. I'm hoping that all of you would be able to figure out what the actual number is from the sequence on the screen. So I actually like this conference because I can actually do this. I'm going to put up another formula up on the screen, and whoever gets the answer to the question gets a free Shut Up, Get to Work t-shirt. So it's cool that Berman said no Google, so it'll be really cool. But yes, predictable, adaptive, that's the formula. By the time I'm done with these couple of slides, the first one to tell me what the answer, oh yes, there we go. So it needs to be adaptive. And by that I mean you can apply, just like the formula sets here, some way of doing things that regardless of what project you're working on and how many people you're working with, it fits. You can switch your tools, you can switch your process depending on how big the project is, how small the project is, and the process is adaptive. So, you go, what is the answer? -3. All right. You said? 0. The answer is 0. See me after this. So, yeah. Now, why is it 0? So, when I went to school, we call it board mass. And here they usually call it PEMDAS, and the mnemonics for it is, please educate my dear Aunt Sally, which is, you have, board mass is brackets of division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. So it's an actual sequence, basic order of operations for mathematics. Once they changed it a little bit, PEMDAS came in, they added exponentials to it, they switch around the division and the multiplication, the order of precedence doesn't really matter. Same as addition and subtraction. So this is a good indicator. It's a good process workflow. Regardless of where the calculation takes place, you have a guiding principle of what you're going to do. So in this case, 1 plus 2 is 3. Order of precedence is a bracket. You multiply it by 2, and you get 6. And then, because the multiplication takes precedence over the subtraction, 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 minus 6, you get 0. So this gives you an idea of how you're going to, this gives you an adaptive way of doing your mathematical calculations. So the last characteristics, great characteristics of a good process, of a good workflow, is idempotency. So idempotency, another mathematical concept, is where ability of taking an action on any single object and obtaining the same result. So regardless of how often and how long it takes, you get the same result. So whether you're taking the action on, a calculation like that one you just did once, or you do it multiple times, at the end of the day, the expectation is the same. It's the concept of repeatability. You can repeat it as many times as you can, but you still have the same result. So that's a good workflow. It makes it very easy for you to adapt to it. It makes it very easy to change it, to scale, if I may use that word. So now, with the workflow, there's something else you need. You need house rules. At 9 Labs, we jokingly call them commandments, because my name is Moses. And we have a partner, Brad's in the back. I'm going to call him out. We call him Abe. And Jay Cornelius, who handles JC. So we kind of have fun with it. So you have to set some house rules, because one of the most things that will bring, I would say, religious arguments is tools. Mac versus Windows. We had one yesterday, GIFs versus GIFs. And if you're a GIF guy, I will not be offended if you actually walked out on the presentation right now. But you need some house rules. You need to set those boundaries. You need to set those rules. Because with those rules, regardless of how you came about those rules, they actually give you a foundation and a platform to work on. So whether it is, Windows versus Mac, whether your tools are going to be totally based on, Grunt versus Gulp, you need to have to set those rules. And sometimes the reason for coming up with those rules or the logic behind them may just be like, we don't like Windows. Or I like vanilla versus chocolate, so I'm going to choose one. And those set a foundation. They don't have to be specific rules that are very bound and have huge reasons behind what you're doing. Now, for today's talk, we're going to set some rules. First of all, our version control and the examples we're going to use is Git. So if you're not using version control, please do. I'm not going to call you out if you're not. But for the sake of the presentation, we use Git. Then we're saving our repos on GitHub. Very placeable. You can use Bitbucket, there's GitLab, there's a whole bunch of other repositories you can pay to, or build your own to host your own repositories. And the last rule, of course, we're going to be doing this on the Mac. Why are we not doing it on the Windows? I like Mac better. It's my presentation. Then again, the tools, I would not have the presentation if I was going to do it for both Mac and Windows. So maybe, but some of those tools, you can still use them on a Windows machine and a Windows environment. Then the other thing we're going to look at is the kind of people you're working with. So how many of you here are solo developers? You build your own projects, you don't have team members, you don't interact with anyone, it's just you, you're king or queen of your kingdom, right? So, wow, good for you. The one guy. And of course, that's him right there. And then, how many of you are freelancers? You do other people's projects. Awesome, cool, nice. You very different kind of technologies every so often, 2 to 3 projects, or just one. And then you have the team guys. How many of you work corporate? You're part of a team, you lead a team. Awesome. So this is actually going to be a good exercise for you guys. And then the next thing is your environment. So we're going to split this up into a couple environments and see where those tools fit in and where you'd want to put them. And sometimes some of the examples we look at may not necessarily fit what you may think or where you may think they do fit. So in a typical environment, you have your local development environment. And then you have a staging environment or preview or QA. And that's why, that's why everybody else sees what you've been working on in conjunction with what everybody else is working on. If it breaks there, not too bad. But, that's what a staging environment is supposed to be for. Then you have the production environment. This is where you have, or probably would have as a developer, least control. This is where everybody sees stuff. This way, if stuff breaks, you're getting called on. So, and you don't want to do that. So we'll look at how you can set up those environments and how you can interact with those 3 environments as a team member or as a freelancer, depending on how much control you have on those environments. So the very first one is your local environment. As we said, we're doing this on a Mac, so we've set that up. And the needs for that particular environment is to be able to set up where it's as close as possible to what your production environment is going to be or how it looks like. So pick your language of choice. How many of you are doing PHP? Cool. Ruby, Python folks in here? Awesome. Anything else that doesn't matter? All right, cool. Awesome. No one? Yay. So, and then you have your local web server. So typically PHP, Ruby, Python will require some sort of local web server in order for you to be to view your work on your browser. And you also want a way in which you easily manipulate your environment to add dependencies and modules. So there are a couple of candidates of local environments. So on a Mac, it does actually ship in with default web servers for PHP and for Ruby, and you can fire those off. So you can work with them. They're a pain to work with. Updating your modules. I think right now, if you buy a brand new Mac, you get PHP 5.4.24, and it's actually quite interesting. I've been using the mumps and the vagrants and the boxing until the other day when I was trying to fire up a local Jekyll web server and realized I could do this in PHP. So it's there, but it's not that easy to use. It's painful to work with, and it's hard to actually get stuff working. You have your mumps and the wumps. I'm not a big fan. Then you have your vagrant, who is also a new kid on the block. And we'll look at that a little bit more, and the boxen. So, excuse me. So how do you get your PHP running? All you have to do is open up your terminal and type that command, and you have a local web server running on your machine. Now, if you go to the actual documentation on PHP, there's a huge, big, fat red warning that tells you this is only meant for development. It is not advisable for you to use it. And a whole lot of people assume that it's telling you that you don't use the local web server, but they don't finish reading the warning. It says it's only advisable to use it for your local dev environment, which is exactly what we want to do. And for most of the applications and frameworks out there, it actually works. I tried it on WordPress, and surprisingly, it worked, which is really interesting concept when you're working with WordPress. But for most of the frameworks, the Zen, the Symphonies, the Slims, it actually is a good companion for you when you're doing PHP development in your local environment. So, Jekyll, same thing, pretty easy, command line. Same thing, add your port number. Watch will actually refresh or reset the site while you're working on it. And then, let's go to Vagrant. So, Vagrant is a good tool. I actually was really happy when I found out about Vagrant. I was working on a couple of projects, and they were all different clients. They had different boxes I needed to prime up, different versions of PHP. Requires a virtual machine. Most commonly used, a whole lot of people use VirtualBox for it. You'll find a whole lot of pre-built boxes for it. But it also comes with a caveat. So now if you're doing PHP and you just got into it, you need to learn how to use Puppet, Shell, scripting, or Chef, but can also be automated. So if you're working on a team, you can actually build your boxes, re-automate those, and pretty much provision out for your team members. And you don't have to necessarily have to do that every single time. So after a while, you update the boxes depending on what projects you're working on. The caveat here is, if you're like me at one point who had 3 to 4 boxes running, all of them that required different types of provisioning, it becomes a headache to actually maintain because of the sizes of your virtual machines and the virtual boxes. And then you get to a team that has 6 or 7 folks, and you're starting a new project, requires a new virtual box. That's at least about an hour to 2 hours to actually get a virtual box running on that machine for each team member. So you have a VirtualBox or Vagrant provisioning day in which that's all what you do, which it could be a good thing, bring in pizza, but after a while it gets annoying. So, excuse me. I discovered this guy, Boxen. How many have heard of Boxen? Awesome. Yeah, you'll get a t-shirt too. So Boxen is from GitHub, and what they've done is they use Puppet to do the provisioning, but take out the virtual boxes. So since all the tools or the dependencies are there to actually build your local environment, they use Homebrew, which we'll look here in a few minutes, and it will, using Puppet configurations, will go ahead and configure your box without the need of a virtual machine. So all the dependencies that you would need on your local environment are set up on the get-go. The scripts are, you can put them on version control. So regardless of what you're working on, what your role is in the company, you're a front-end developer, you only get the tools that you need. You're a back-end developer, you only get the tools that you need. You can combine depending on what project you have. So it's an actual pretty good tool to use. Now the thing is that it does take a little while to get all your environments working properly. So it's one of those things that you have to iterate through in order for it to work well for you. So unless you have teams of about 10 to 25, it will not make a whole lot of sense to actually go the Boxen route. But it is a good tool. So my favorite flavor ended up being a combination of a couple of things. First one is Homebrew. How many are you familiar with Homebrew? Awesome. And then second, use a built-in web server. and use your favorite task runner. So in this case, our favorite task runner is Grunt. Why? That's what we learned first. We haven't found a reason to switch over. So, and there's a lot of modules that are built into Grunt right now that helped us to accomplish this. So, easy to set up and update. You have the advantage of boxing, where you can customize by the role in the project. And you can combine other non-web server tasks to your actual task runner. So, with that, Homebrew, I hope all people are familiar with it, so I'll jump that. So what is Homebrew? Homebrew is a package manager for Mac and allows you to do things like that, PHP. And the reason why I'm using Homebrew here is so that it can replace the default PHP installation and you'll be able to update your local PHP. So install the latest PHP, add the modules that don't come with a Mac, right? Do that, and then you feel like a boss. And that's it. So that in itself, you're a PHP developer. I've already set up PHP 5.6 on your machine, and you're done, just by installing Homebrew. So, all right, now we want to go ahead and set up a project. We're doing some front-end development with it. But we need PHP to run our pages. So what are we going to do? Now, Homebrew required Xcode, so we've already satisfied that. We already installed Homebrew. We installed Node.js because we will run task runners that are dependent on Node. Then, install our packages using our favorite package manager. Bower is a good one, Broccoli is a good one. So, or don't use any package managers at all, and then run the task runner. How does the task look? This is a project that did not have any other task apart from running PHP. So I installed Grunt PHP, and using Grunt develop as a task, it runs the PHP local server. So this allows this project to be adaptive. The developers in my team don't need to do any of the installations. They don't need to figure out how to run the local PHP server. All they need to do is clone the repository. If we've already gone through the initial setup of setting up Homebrew, all they need to do is run grunt develop on that particular directory, and their project is set up. So how does that look like if you have a project that has a whole lot of other tasks? So this is another front-end project. You want to clean out your JavaScript. You want to compile your Sass. You want to minify your CSS, uglify your JavaScript, copy your assets from whatever package manager you're using, and you want to see this happen while you're working on it. So all the other tasks in your grunt are set up already, and I have a particular task called grunt develop, and it runs all that and does the PHP too. So regardless of how big and how small your application is, all you have to do is know that one task, the grunt develop, and that will handle all the other tasks that are required. So in terms of to the developer, what's the difference between running a really huge application versus a really small one? There isn't, because there's only one command you're running, and that's already set up for you. What do you see on your command line? Just that. And your application's running. Now, we do add specific port numbers for different applications. Therefore, if you want to run a front-end application that's connecting to an API and you need both of them to run at the same time, if I run grunt develop, then they can communicate with one another as you're running. So that's your local environment. Let's look at your remote environment. So the staging, production, QA. Most of the time, as a developer, you will not have access to all of them or some of them, or you will not have unlimited access to those environments. And if you do, I'd advise that you actually reduce the access you have to that, because it's just opening up opportunities for errors in your workflow. So some of the tests and tasks you need to work on your remote environment is run tests, run deployments, view logs, do some troubleshooting if you have to. So what we did is an example of some of the tasks that you'd want to run on your remote environments. Clone a repository, install the packages, set up the environment, bump the version, archive the project, copy the package over to production, and when you're done, remove the current set of files, unpack the package. There's a different variation of how this is commonly done. Warm up the cache, restart the old web server, and you're done. So for deployments, there are a couple of tools that are out there that help you do this. How many are familiar with Capistrano? All right, cool. Any of the others? Fabric, Ming, Fing? Awesome. Great. So Capistrano, all those steps we just run, you can actually create tasks for those and automate that. So Capistrano is a built-in Ruby. The tasks with Capistrano 3 are rake tasks, and all the connections to your servers are through SSH, and it's using actually SSH kit, if I'm not wrong right now. So Capistrano is it's common. There's a lot of tutorials out there. It's a great tool to use. It's usually set up per project, so it's not our entire server setup. You can do that. That's what we're actually doing right now, is we have a single Capistrano project that houses all the different projects we're working with, and we just import or include some of the tasks that may work for the different projects. So that's Capistrano. Mina is kind of like Capistrano, only that where Capistrano runs SSH to the remote servers with every single task, what Mina does is it takes all those tasks, runs them once, creates a bash script, and does SSH into the remote repository and runs that script once. So their selling point, which I've actually tested and found it to be quite effective, is the fact they're really, really, really fast. So it's a good choice. Between the two, it's up to you, whatever flavor you find comfortable. So they are good tools for you to use. Now, Fabric is Capistrano for Python. And literally, that's what they say. So you want to do Python, or you want something built in Python, but you want the features that are in Capistrano, you go with Fabric. Now, Fing is the PHP version, but it's not similar to the others. So Fing is a version of, or similar to Ant tasks. So nobody raised their hand when we mentioned Java, but if you're familiar with Ant, it's used heavily, or used to be used heavily in Java. So what you do with Fing is you create targets in XML that are executed on the command line. It's actually a really great tool. There are a lot of already done tasks, and Fing has a good catalog of tasks that you usually do. The good thing about it is that it actually lets you set the order of things the way you want them done. It's very versatile in terms of you may not necessarily want to, for example, build something in tar or zip it. You have options of how you can do that. So Fing is an actually good tool. That's what we actually ended using. There are some others that I'm not going to mention here. I'm going to mention, but I haven't listed. There's the Jenkins. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Jenkins. All right, that's the reason why I didn't put it on the list, because Jenkins is quite familiar with a whole lot of people, and it's something that you actually have to actively go install and manage and maintain. After a while, it becomes a huge burden, and the cost of maintaining Jenkins, as for us, ended up being a whole lot more than the benefit it was giving us. Now, there is a couple of other options. If you want hosted, continuous integration server. There's Travis CI, is the most popular one. There are a couple of other versions of those. There's another one called CodeShip that's come out really recently, which is pretty good. Now, there's a Node version of Capistrano-like called Strider CD, which is selling itself to be the Node CI-ish continuous integration application. But there are a whole lot of others that are there that, they offer different types of services that may fit what you're actually looking for. But these are the main ones, and they're ones that we've actually tried and tested at 9 Labs. So we've looked at that, and now what? So we have our integration pieces, we have our local environment, we have our remote environment. How do we piece all this together? How do we communicate between one environment to the other? What's the workflow here? How does it work? Where does this tools fit into the general view of things? So I'll introduce you to this guy by the name of Hubot. How many have heard about Hubot? How many are using Hubot? Awesome. What do you call your Hubot? Slackbot. All right. Anybody has somebody else raise your hand. What do you call yours? Hubot. All right. Awesome. So we call ours Coop. So Coop, another whole story altogether, does a lot of things for us. So Hubot is pretty much a JavaScript bot. We treat him, Coop, as a member of the team. So the only thing that he doesn't do is bake cookies for us. That's the only thing. He will do deployments. He will set up local environments. He will call you out if your tests fail. Excuse me. He will check the health of your environments. He will show up in our chat every so often and just pug bomb everyone. We have cool Fridays where we wake up in the morning and just say hi to everybody. And if you don't respond in a certain period of time, then he will just keep on sending you Octocat out and cats and pictures and and GIFs. So that's what Coop does. Now, to kind of explain how the flow works. So Coop is pretty much, he lives on our chat servers. We use HipChat, but you can put him on, I'm assuming Slack. Yeah, you can put him on Slack, Campfire. There are a lot of plugins for that. And what you do is you set up Hubot to access your integration server where your Capistrano and your Mina live. And all he does is listen to certain terms and certain words that you have in order to do things like that. So this is the original Hubot, and you tell Hubot, deploy your application. Hubot goes out, does your deployments, comes back and tells you, yay, your deployments are done. So, and you can modify Hubot to do a whole lot of things and bring back information you'd like. So we're into numbers. So we actually, our Coop brings back responses with how long the deployment took, with things like how long the test took, how's the code coverage within the last, in the last pull request, things like that. So we try and put all these things together to where they're informative and fun to work with. So there's kind of a healthy competition. So if stuff fails, Coop will go in and bring back a Git blame and pretty much tells you, hey, dude, you got to step up on your game. You've had so many fails in your test so far. Hey, let's see what's going on. So things like that. So Hubot is a good tool to use. Now, how does that sit in your environment? This is our environment. So at the bottom, you have your developers. They interact with GitHub. We do all our stuff on GitHub. Pull requests, pretty much issues. All our discussions are there. And then Hubot can interact with GitHub and bring back some of those things that are happening on GitHub. And at the same time, he lives in our integration environment where we have our Capistrano and Mina, and appropriately called Coopville because that's Coop's ground. That's where he lives and that's where he works. So there is no direct relationship, or there's no direct connection between you as a developer to your production and staging environment, but you have access to do things on that particular environment through Coop. And we set up the access for the staging and the production environments for just Coop, and we're able to maintain that. So that allows us to be, I'd say, very adaptive depending on what applications we're using. So what environments you're working with and what projects you're working on. So you may have a client who has only given you VPN access to the actual box, and you're a team of 6, and they give only one guy the VPN access. So at that point, you're like, it's okay, we can do this. So guess what? Instead of picking one of the team members, give Coop the access, and Coop is the only one who will be able to tunnel in over, create a tunnel over SSH and do the deployments, and we don't have to worry about it. If you are, provisioning a new box and you want a new staging environment and give access to everybody else, well, you don't have to go ahead and collect everybody's keys in order to create SSH keys or access to that box. All you have to do is set up Coop to be able to do it, and that's set. So you have that one gatekeeper that can manage all the other tasks that are required to do your deployments on the environment. Now, the next step we're trying to do is to actually get Coop to provision people's boxes. That may be a bit far-reaching, but I don't know. It may make a whole lot work easier for us. But it's proven to be a good way to manage our environments and to make things flow well. So our workflow is working for us. We can pick and choose the tools we want to use depending on the projects we want, especially on the integration environment, the pieces where the Capistrano, we can be able to pick and choose and pull out stuff and put stuff back in, because we have only one person, Coop or Hubot, to worry about. So it's been a good thing for us and has increased our efficiency in how we work greatly. It's been pretty effective, and we don't have to worry about having to set up Capistrano on people's boxes in order for them to actually deploy the applications. And it saved us a whole lot of headaches in terms of everybody's choices of tools in the office. So pretty much, if you go by our basic house rules at the office, you can install and work with anything else you want, and whatever tools you want are not a problem for us. And I think that should work for a whole lot of you too. Thank you very much.